So the first fly we're going to tie is called an Elk Hair Caddis. Here in Utah we have two major dry flies. We have mayflies, which the second fly we're going to tie today, tied in different colors and different sizes, will imitate just about all the mayflies that we have on the rivers here. And then we have caddis flies. We have a pretty spectacular hatch around Mother's Day in May. And then we have the evening caddis that kind of hatch all the way through the summer. So that's the first fly we're going to tie. Typically this fly is tied with a green body and a bleached elk hair wing. Some of you have green dubbing in your packs and some of you have orange. What I found around here is that an orange body with a darker wing, I seem to catch more fish on. So, but either way, we're going to tie it up and you can fish it. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I have a size 14 hook in here. Let me get on my super duper bionic glasses.
So Dave, is that size 14 normal?
No, actually I tie them, when I fish these, I tie them on a 16.
Okay.
But in this class, we're teaching everything big, so.
Great.
All right, so I'm gonna start. So what they recommend on this fly is that, Jason was talking last week about eye lengths, and we usually start this fly 1 eye length back from the front. I'm gonna start at 2 eye lengths back because there's a lot of, when you're first tying these flies, there's a lot of opportunity to crowd your head. So I'm gonna go ahead and start my thread a couple of eye lengths back. And I'm going to just do a few wraps. And then the next material I'm going to tie in is going to be my wire. Now the wire that you guys have is extra small. This stuff is tiny. And the reason being that anything heavy I put on a fly I want to float doesn't work so well. So I'm going to take my wire, I'm going to lay it right on top of my hook, and I'm going to get a couple of wraps on it, and then I can pull the end until it's nice and even. Okay, and I'm going to take my wraps on just about all the flies that we tie. You can see the barb on my hook. I want to take my last thread wrap until it hangs right in line with that barb. Okay, so now I'm going to dub. And like I said, some of you have green. This color here is called caddis orange, and I really like it for caddis flies around here. Okay, so with all dubbing, and especially on dry flies, we want to get the dubbing body nice and tight. So I'm going to take very tiny little pieces to start. And I'm going to dub it on very, very tight. I don't want this thing to absorb any more water than it has to. A lot of people will tie these with carrot-shaped bodies. Truth is that caddis have a pretty slim body. But I'll go ahead and try to taper it up a little bit. So as I'm putting my dubbing on, where I'm going to end up, I'm going to use a little bit more down here. And then I'm just going to slide my noodle right up next to my thread. Okay, now it's really important that I get my very first wrap of dubbing right back here, right where my wire ties in. I don't want any space there. And then as I come forward, being careful to avoid my hook point, I'm going to try to build a little bit of a taper coming forward. All right, and then if you do have the orange dubbing, it's kind of a nice dubbing, just kind of pull your fibers back, put a few wraps of thread right in front. So you can see that's kind of a tapered body, a little buggy looking. All right, so now my next step is I'm going to put something that kind of simulates legs. So what this is our hackle fiber. And the way we measure hackle, so as you can see in a typical cape, I've got really big feathers here, I've got really tiny feathers here. They make hackle gauges and all kinds of ways to measure it, but if I just put this on my hook and spread it around, I kind of want those fibers to be about a hook gape long. All right, and the other thing that we're going to do with these hackles today, when John Schultz tied his flies, we tied them in what I call backwards, so that the barbules faced forward, because on his streamers, as he pulled them through the water, he wanted them to make noise. On this dry fly, we want our hackle to lay backwards. So if you look, every hackle feather has a top and a bottom, or a shiny side and a dull side. The shiny side, the barbules come down kind of concave, and that's what we want to do. So the way I'm going to prepare this feather, I'm going to tie it in from the butt. And I don't need very much, so what I do is I just take my thumbnail and I strip it down to bare stem. Okay? And that's what I'm going to tie in with. Okay, now I want the shiny side facing forward on my fly. So I'm going to take shiny side up. I'm going to put my hackle in at a 45-degree angle. See if I can get that tied in on my side. I'm going to wrap all the way up to the eye and back, and I'm going to tie this in really tight. Okay? So now I'm going to wrap it backwards. Let me go ahead and I'm going to get my thread out of my way. And so to wrap backwards, what I want to do is I want to do my first wrap, I want to do a full collar wrap. So I'm going to go around one whole time. And then going backwards, this is called palmering or spiraling or barber pole or however you want to say it. So I'm going to kind of put an angle on my hackle, bring it all the way back to the back. Okay, now when I get back here, do not let go of your hackle. Now I'm going to take my wire, and just like Jason was talking about last week, counter wrapping. So I'm going to take my wire and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do 2 wraps in the very back to tie off my hackle. So now my hackle's tied. And then as I come forward, if your wire is mashing down your hackle fibers, if you'll just wiggle it back and forth, it'll lay down in between them. And this is very, very thin wire, so don't pull too hard. And then as I come forward, I can go ahead and just put a couple of wraps right here on the head. Take your thread, tie it off. So a couple of wraps behind. Wrapping 2 in front. And then with this wire, you don't really have to use your scissors. You can just helicopter it and it'll break right off. Come in and remove the excess hackle. Okay. Now you've effectively tied a giant Griffith's gnat. Alright, so now we're going to put a wing on. So this is something that we haven't done yet. So what we have on the tables is we have elk and deer hair. This happens to be a very dark deer hair, but for doing this fly, this will work just fine. So to remove hair from your pelt, your teachers will do this close up with you, but if you notice, everywhere I've taken hair from this pelt, I've cut it really, really tight. Deer hair is not all created equal. So if you go to buy some, make sure you take it out of the package, you take a look at it. So one of the main things with deer hair and elk hair is that you see all this little fuzz and fiber and trash that's in the butt sections. So that means that this deer, if the deer is shot in the middle of the summer, it won't have much of that underfur. If it's shot in the winter, it's going to have a ton. And so anyway, once I cut it off, I've got my nice clump here. What I want to do is transfer it to my left hand, and now I've got it by the tips, and I can kind of, with my hand, just kind of roll it apart, And then with my other hand, now they make cool little combs and things like that I could use to comb all this out, but you guys don't have those. So what I can do is just take my hands, and as I come through, I'll pull out all the short fibers, I'll pull out all the fuzz. I can kind of whack it back and forth, and I can get that clean. It's important that it's clean, because if it's not clean, it won't stack. And everybody in their kit has a hair stacker. They're two-piece, usually made out of aluminum or brass. Some of them are plastic. What I do is I take my tips and I just drop them in. Make sure that everything is sitting pretty level. And then you don't tap very hard. Tap several times, holding the bottom part, and let the top part bounce around. So when I get done, so my wing on my fly is going to go this way. The tips are going to go this way. So I want to take it out, and I want to take it level, and see now all my tips are perfectly lined up. With my left hand, I'm going to grab across the edge of them, and then I'm going to switch to my right hand. Now I've got a clump of nice even tips. I'm going to put it right down on top of my fly, and I want to measure a wing that comes right to the back of the body. So at this point, if you watch guys on YouTube tie this fly, I'm going to transfer to my left hand so my tip length is correct. So I'm going to transfer to my left hand. A lot of guys now will come in and they'll clip these butt sections off. I'm going to teach you guys without doing that, so that you can actually see how your tips flare and how to really compress this. All right, so I'm going to put this right down on top, and I'm going to hold with my left hand. I've got a death grip on the tips of these hair fibers. Do not let go, okay? All right, so now what I'm going to do, you can do a pinch wrap here. You almost don't have to, because you have such a death grip. But if you want to go ahead and do your pinch wrap, bring it up. You want to keep your deer right on top of your hook. So if you notice, I've just put 2 loose wraps on. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some pressure, and then I'm going to wrap and pressure. And each wrap, you can see my tips or my butts are flaring out a little bit more. Don't try to do this all in one time, you'll break your thread. All right, so each wrap around, and then when it pretty much stops flaring, I'm good. And there's my little wing. These are my little butt sections. Okay, so now to put a head on this fly, it's kind of got a shovel-nosed kind of a head. You've all got downward eyes on your hooks, and they're at the exact right angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gather up all these butt sections, and I'm going to come in with my scissors, and I'm going to go right up against my hook eye and take them off. Now see, this is why we started two eyes back, because with this head here I can easily get across that hook eye. And you know, I'm going to come in and I'm going to trim it up a little bit, but that's pretty good. All right, now we're pretty much done. We're going to whip finish. Now one thing that you can do, if you have, I'm going to whip finish right here where my hair wraps are. If you have crowded your eye, you can actually come in with your thread and come right over the eye, and that'll actually pull hair backwards if you've gotten it a little too close, but this one will be okay. And the other thing that you want to do is you want to use some head cement on these flies. So we've got water base. I've got this one here I'm not crazy about, but I'll use it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little bit of head cement right here on these wraps. That's why I don't like it. It comes out white. And then I can flip it over, and I can also put some on the wraps on the bottom. Careful not to get it into your eye. The worst thing in the world is tie a beautiful fly and get out in the river and not be able to get your tippet through it. So anyway, that's the Elk Hair Caddis. We're going to tie gray ones today. And if I was going to fish a gray one, I would probably tie it in a size 18 or a 20 and fish it for a blue wing olive. But we're going to make it big. Tie it in a size 24 with no tail on it with just black thread and fish it for a midge. Or you could tie it in a size 8, 10 and green and fish it for a green drake on the 4th of July. So we're going to use our gray thread that we have in our boxes for this next one, and it's 8/0 thread. The thread I'm actually fishing or tying with is 14/0. It's called sheer. Okay, so I want a nice smooth thread base on this fly, so I'm going to go ahead and start my thread up by the eye. And here's a little trick. If you take your waist piece and hold it off at about a 45-degree angle as you're making your wraps, it'll gather your wraps one right next to the other. It'll make a nice, smooth thread base for your fly. And same as the last fly, I want to take this all the way back to my barb, so right before the hook starts to bend. And then remove your waist piece. All right, I'm going to do something else nice for you guys. Instead of, the way this fly is typically tied, we use 2 different color hackles. We use grizzly and red. And the way it's traditionally tied, they take long red barbules and long gray grizzly barbules, mix them together and create a tail out of it. That would probably take us a couple hours right there. So what I'm going to do, I've got a piece of Coke de Leon in everybody's box. I like this stuff for all my dry fly tails. It's tough as wire. I think it looks good, and it it's easy to tie in. So, all right. So as you can see, I've got nice speckled fibers, and I can pick a spot in this feather. Mayflies only have 2 tails. 2 tails or 3 tails? 2 tails. Yeah, that's right. But we're going to go ahead and just tie in a little clump. Okay, so I've got about 10 fibers there. I want all my tips to be pretty close to aligned. All right, and then my tail I want to be a hook shank length long. Actually, in mayflies, the tail is pretty long. I don't like putting them on that long, but you certainly can. And then what I do, I want to keep this right on top. If I put it on the side close to me, when I pull my thread over, it pulls it right on top. Okay? And then I've just got 2 wraps on. I can look at my tail here, see if I like the length, which I do. I'm going to put a couple of tight wraps, and then this is just a little trick if you want to try to stand your tail up better. Pull it up, pull your thread underneath it, give it a nice tight pull, and it'll flare it up for you. All right, so on this fly, I want to incorporate the butts into my body. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come forward. I want to be careful to keep all those butts right on top. And I'm going to wrap forward, and I'm going to go to about 2/3. Okay, so if I take the length from my eye to where my tails tie in right here, that's about 2/3, right? And that is where I'm going to put in my parachute post. Okay, and everybody has got a little strand of this stuff right here, and
the parachute makes it visible.
Yeah, so the parachute is for you. It's got nothing to do with the fish. You can tie a parachute post out of calf hair if you want to stay all natural. You can tie pink, orange, fluorescent colors, white. Your parachute can be whatever color you think. on cloudy days, I think pink actually works better than white does. I like this stuff because, as you can see where it comes off of this board, it's got a kink in it. That's just about a perfect length.
He likes kinky stuff.
I like kinky stuff. That's why I like Bill's mustache.
Jealous.
All right. So, for a size 14 fly, this is too much parachute here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit out and just kind of strip it out. All right. Now, attaching a parachute. There's a lot of flies that have parachutes on them. Some people will put them up underneath and tie them in. I don't really like doing that. I don't like that bump on the bottom. So I'm going to try to teach this as easy as I can. My thread goes over my hook this way, right? So if I take my parachute material, put it up against my thread, there, it's on. All right, now I need to figure eight it into place, and my figure eights need to be tight, so I want to get my wing about 50% on each side. To figure eight, I'm going to go behind the wing that's closest to me and in front of the wing away from me. 2-3 tight wraps, and then I'm just going to switch. And I'm going to come in front of the wing close to me and behind the wing away. These need to be tight. I can't stress that enough. Sometimes people will actually put a drop of super glue underneath these thread wraps, but if I get it on there tight, I'm good. And so now you can see my wing is tied on. All right, now we got to stand this sucker up. And so when we're teaching this fly, if anybody has trouble with this, what you can do is you can twist it and put a little drop of UV cement or super glue right there and let it dry. Hit it with the light for the UV cement, and that'll make the bottom of this post stiff, and then it's easier to wrap. Jason and I were talking last week, there's a tool called a gallows tool. It's a contraption that hooks onto your vise and comes over the top and holds your parachute like that, and I think they're probably more trouble to set up than they are to go ahead and just try to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my thread up on top of my hook, and the key to this is to get my thread level, turn my bobbin upside down, and I just have to keep the right amount of pressure. If I pull too hard, I'll pull my parachute over, and I don't want my thread to go slack, but I just want it to be at the right pressure. And if I do that, I can wrap a few wraps. Now really all I want to do with these wraps is just kind of gather up the two pieces and bring them together. Okay? So now I'm stood up and I need to put my wing in. Alright, so like I said, we're going to use two different hackles on this. And once again, you know, I want to measure. So on this fly, I want my wing, the barbules, I want them to extend back to where my tie-in point is. So just by tying a few flies, I kind of know what size I'm looking for. But to measure it, I put it around my post, and you can see my barbules are coming back right to about where my tail tie-in point is. All right, this one is actually a little bit big, but I'll go ahead and use it. Okay, and now since I've measured my gray one, I don't have to measure my red one, I just need to grab one that's the same size. And here again, all hackles, just like deer hair, they're not all created equal. I can't stress enough that if you're going to buy stuff, go take it out of the package, take a look at it, take a look at the, you know what you're tying. You know, if I'm tying a bunch of giant streamers, then I just need a bunch of giant hackles. If I'm tying different sizes, I want to make sure there's plenty of those sizes. All right, so like I said before, we got a dull side, we got a shiny side, or a top side and a bottom side. Is that showing up on camera okay? All right. I want to match these together, shiny sides up. It doesn't matter which one's on top, but I'm going to put them together so that they're kind of cupped And then what I'm going to do, once I've got them all matched up, I'm going to bring my thumbnail down and I'm going to strip my bare stems simultaneously. Now, I need a little bit more stem on this one than I do that last one because I've got a lot more to tie in. Come in and clip them. And just make sure that I got plenty of stem. Okay, so I got quite a bit there. All right, now I'm going to take these two stems. When I wrap my wing, I want my shiny sides up, not necessarily for the color, but for the shape. Okay, so the shiny side is concave down this way, and I want my wing to lay down this way. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and take these two stems, and I'm going to tie them in. I put them at a 45-degree angle to my post, and I'm going to tie the tips in all the way to the eye and back. Now once I get to my post, I want to tie these in. I want to incorporate them in my parachute post. Now, because I got those two stems in there, my post is even stiffer. So now I can just slowly work up. I want to make a nice thread post here. And I want to bring it up. I'm not really sure how to measure that. I just kind of eyeball it, but I want to bring it up so I can get about 5 or 6 wraps of hackle coming back down. So I want to do nice touching wraps up. And once I get as high as I want to be, then I'm going to work my way down.
It's usually the height of your post is usually about the same distance from your post to the eye of the hook.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so when I get back down now, I've got my hackle tied into my post. All right, so now I'm ready to put a body on this. So what we're going to teach you guys is we're going to just dub some fine and dry gray dubbing. It's dry fly dubbing. It is the easiest, well, if the guys that did the green dubbing on their caddis, it's that stuff. It's the easiest dubbing in the world to put on. The more coarse and spiky your dubbing gets, the harder it is to put on. The finer it gets, the easier it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to teach you guys to do a dubbed body and then a dubbed thorax. I'm going to do something a little different for you just to kind of give you an idea of some other materials that are out there. So this stuff here is called goose biot. And if you imagine a feather, the front of the feather that goes into the wind has got the biot feathers on, and then the back has got the long feathers. So this is just a stripped goose biot. The reason I like to use this on a dry fly is because, like we were talking earlier, you know, I want to use the most buoyant materials I can. And dubbing, you know, if it's put on really tight and treated well, it doesn't absorb a lot of water, but it absorbs some. Whereas these goose biots don't absorb any. These can be tied on 2 different ways. So I don't know if you can see, but there's a little notch right there on the top. So if I tie this in by the tip with the notch facing up, I'm going to get a nice smooth body. If I tie it in with the notch facing down, I'm going to get a nice segmented body. And the reason is that this feather is actually kind of shaped like an L. And that little foot L part is a little ridge. When I wrap it one way, that ridge gets suppressed by the wrap that precedes it, whereas if I wrap it the other way, the ridge comes out. So I'm going to go ahead and just wrap this in. I'm going to tie it in just by the tip. And this, again, this is just to kind of show you guys that there's some other stuff out there and kind of just get you exposed so you hear the words. And so what I need to do, what I usually do when I put biots on is I put just a thin layer of super glue here so that it'll stay down. I won't glue this one though, I'll just wrap it on. So I'm going to grab it with my hackle pliers. And you know, materials like this, when you're tying them on, you know, just to go ahead and wrap them and keep that tension, it gets a little tricky. So I'll just show you, if you guys think you're going to tie it all, I can't recommend rotary vices enough. And I'll just show you just how easy this goes on. with rotary. I just kind of hold it to myself and wrap it up. And I think that's a really buggy looking, nicely segmented body. And much easier to put on with rotary than without. So now when I get it up to the end here, I'm going to go ahead and tie it off. A couple of wraps behind.
You use those buyouts a lot for tail
Yeah.
feathers on lots of different flies too.
Prince nymphs and okay, so now I'm going to trim it, and if you notice I've got my thread hanging on the other side and I'm trimming on this side. I want to really be careful not to cut my thread. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and dub, and this is how we're going to teach you guys to do this whole fly. So I want to bring my thread all the way up to my eye. And I'm going to use fine gray dubbing. And the reason I brought my thread up to my eye is that I want a backward taper this time. Okay, and this is the dubbing. It's very fine. Okay, moisten your fingers. Tiny, tiny little bits. And this dubbing, I could almost just pull it off like a string and wrap it on. It's really thin. Okay, so just a tiny little bit. And then what I want to do is I want to wrap my first wrap right behind my eye, and then I'm going to come backwards, and I want to try to build a taper as I come back to the post. Once I get to the post, I'm going to go behind it, in front of it, and behind it. Okay, it's important that I end up with my thread on that side of the hook behind my post. And I'll show you why now. All right, so now I'm going to wrap my wing. All right, and I do find this easier to do by hand, but if you want to use your hackle pliers, by all means. Alright, so I want to make sure that I get my shiny sides up, and I want to do my first wrap right at the top of my post, and each wrap goes underneath the wrap before. I bring it down. What determines how much hackle you want on here is kind of the water you're fishing. If I'm fishing rough, fast water, I want more. If I'm fishing stiller water, I want less. All right, so now here come the tricks. How the hell do you tie this hackle off, right? All right, so I've got the two pieces in my hand, and I'm going to pull them down. I'm going to take my thread, which is behind that post, and I'm going to do 4 wraps right underneath the hackle that I wound on. Okay, 4 wraps, and I'm tied off. Now, I'm going to come in and just clip off the butts. And now, how do you whip finish this thing with all that hackle sticking forward? How do you not tie those things down to the eye of your hook? The people that attempt it will take their parachute, pull it back real hard, and expose the eye, and then you can get in there with a whip finisher. I'll show you something even better. And I've been doing them this way now for several years, and I've never ever had one come undone. A little bit of super glue on either side of my thread. Pick it up, come underneath my hackle, right up against my body. 3, 4 tight wraps. Don't even have to wait for it to dry. And now all I have to do is a little bit of a haircut. So the length of my parachute, I like it to be about a shank length long. You can make it less, you can make it more. Some people like them short. I take my parachute material, I twist it tight, come in with my scissors, and then when I flip this over, can you guys see those hackles right there? You always get those. Not really sure why. Just come in and clip those. Anything that goes below the level of my fly, I clip off. And I know there's a lot of steps. If you can master this fly and tie it in different sizes and different colors, you can pretty much imitate any of the mayflies that we have around here. So that's it.
Is that the general rule that everything underneath you want clean?
I like it clean. I like everything underneath to be clean. You always get those few fibers though that stick out.